Someone breaks in the Queen's shoes for her. That's not a joke. It was an actual job in the royal household, and when the news broke, people treated it like evidence of monarchy gone mad. Tabloids had a field day. Social media erupted with predictable outrage about pampered royals who couldn't even wear in their own footwear. But here's what nobody bothered to ask. Why would such a job exist in the first place? Because when you actually understand the answer, you might find yourself thinking something you weren't expecting to think. You might find yourself realizing that every single one of these supposedly ridiculous royal positions exists for a reason, a good one. And you might finally give yourself permission to respect something you've been culturally pressured to mock. Let's start with those shoes. In 1994, a woman from Liverpool named Angela Kelly joined the royal household as an assistant dresser. Over the next 25 years, she rose to become personal assistant, curator, and senior dresser to Queen Elizabeth II, responsible for every visible aspect of how the monarch appeared in public. In 2019, with the Queen's personal authorization, Kelly published a memoir called The Other Side of the Coin: The Queen, the Dresser, and the Wardrobe. And in that book, she explained the shoe situation. The Queen has very little time to herself, and not time to wear in her own shoes, Kelly wrote. And as we share the same shoe size, it makes the most sense this way. That's it. That's the whole scandal. Think about what Queen Elizabeth II's schedule actually looked like. Not in vague terms, in specific, documented reality. State banquets that lasted hours. Investitures where she personally bestowed honors on hundreds of recipients, standing throughout. Garden parties at Buckingham Palace with 8,000 guests. The state opening of Parliament, where she'd stand in the House of Lords chamber wearing the robe of state and the imperial state crown, a headpiece weighing over a kilogram, while delivering the speech from the throne. Her coronation in 1953 lasted nearly 3 hours. 3 hours of standing, walking, kneeling, rising, processing, all while wearing ceremonial robes and carrying the weight of a crown. State visits involved receiving lines stretching an hour or more, greeting dignitaries while maintaining the warmth and poise expected of a head of state. And she did this for 70 years. Now imagine doing all of that in new shoes. Anyone who's worn formal footwear knows the first few wearings are agony. Stiff leather, rigid soles, blisters forming by the hour, the back of your heel rubbed raw. For most of us, that's a minor inconvenience. We hobble through a wedding, kick off the shoes under our desk, and let them soften over weeks of gradual use. The Queen didn't have weeks. The Queen had a schedule, measured in 15-minute increments, planned months in advance, with no flexibility for, "my feet hurt." When the state occasion required specific shoes to match a specific outfit, those shoes needed to be comfortable from the moment she put them on. Full stop. So Kelly walked in them first, paced the palace corridors, climbed stairs, stood for extended periods in the exact posture required at state events. By the time the Queen wore them, the leather had already softened, the insoles had already begun to mold, and the worst of the break-in period was over. Is that really so ridiculous? Consider the alternative. A monarch who limped would generate imagery that circulated globally within minutes. A monarch who visibly favored one foot, who betrayed physical distress through facial expression or gait, who shifted her weight noticeably during a diplomatic handshake. That becomes the photograph that defines the event, not the policy discussion. Not the trade agreement, the grimace. And photographs from state occasions don't disappear. They persist for decades, for centuries. They become the historical record. Every biographer, every documentary filmmaker, every history student researching that era will find that image. Kelly wasn't breaking in shoes because the Queen was too precious to experience mild discomfort. She was breaking in shoes because the diplomatic and ceremonial functions of the monarchy require a sovereign who can stand for hours without visible distress. That's not pampering. That's operational planning for someone who had no privacy and no bad days permitted. The Queen awarded Kelly the Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, one of the highest honors in the monarch's personal gift, for service that extended far beyond any single duty. The shoe breaking was just one small element of a role that required intimate knowledge of royal protocol, an understanding of fashion and presentation, creative problem-solving under pressure, and the absolute discretion demanded of someone who saw the monarch at moments when the public image was still being assembled. But shoes are just the beginning. Because personal service to the sovereign takes forms that sound even stranger until you think about them for more than 30 seconds. Every morning at 9 o'clock, a bagpiper plays beneath the monarch's window. Queen Victoria established this tradition, and it has continued ever since. The Piper to the Sovereign, currently held by Pipe Major Paul Burns of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, plays for 15 minutes each morning while the monarch is in residence at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, the Palace of Holyrood House, or Balmoral Castle. When people hear about this, they assume it's some quaint affectation, a bit of Scottish romanticism left over from Victoria's obsession with the Highlands. Charming, perhaps, but hardly necessary. Except, think about what it actually accomplishes. How do you wake a head of state? An alarm clock is jarring, a mechanical shriek that jolts you from sleep into immediate stress. Hardly the ideal start for someone who will spend the day in meetings with foreign leaders, reviewing state papers, and appearing composed through hours of public engagements. A servant knocking on the door creates awkwardness, requires the monarch to be presentable before they've even properly woken. But bagpipes? Bagpipes rise gradually. The drone builds. The melody emerges. You surface from sleep slowly, with time to gather yourself before the day begins. It's a practical solution to a human problem. How do you wake someone who needs to be mentally sharp from the moment their feet hit the floor? Victoria understood this. So did every monarch after her. The position is a full military appointment, held by a serving member of one of the Highland regiments. The piper lives at the palace, wears ceremonial dress, and maintains a repertoire that varies seasonally and by occasion. It's a tremendous privilege to hold, a position that combines military honor with intimate proximity to the sovereign. Is that really so ridiculous? The pattern holds across the entire royal household. Every strange job solves a real problem. Every ancient title preserves something worth preserving, and dismissing them as wasteful says more about our assumptions than about the positions themselves. Take the swan marker. In medieval England, all unmarked mute swans in open waters throughout England and Wales belonged to the crown by royal prerogative. And no, that wasn't some arbitrary assertion of privilege by bored monarchs with nothing better to do. Mute swans represented genuine economic value. Their meat appeared at royal banquets and noble feasts. Swan was a prestige dish, a marker of wealth and status. Their feathers served practical purposes. Their presence on waterways indicated the health of those waterways, much like canaries in coal mines. Controlling the swan population was resource management, and the Crown's claim provided the legal framework for that management. Without centralized authority over swan ownership, disputes would have been constant. Who owns this bird? Who's allowed to hunt it? Who's responsible if the population crashes? The annual practice of swan upping, traveling the Thames to locate, catch, examine, and mark swans, established a tradition that has continued unbroken for centuries. David Barber has held the position of swan marker since 1993. Each July, he oversees an operation that travels upstream between Sunbury-on-Thames and Abingdon, following procedures that medieval royal officials would recognize in their broad strokes. even as the specific techniques have evolved. But here's the thing. The purpose has transformed even while the practice endured. Modern swan-upping generates conservation data that scientists actually use. Each swan encountered during the ceremony is weighed, measured, examined for signs of injury or illness, and fitted with identification bands that allow long-term population tracking. This isn't ceremonial box ticking. The data matters. The threats facing mute swans in contemporary Britain are serious and ongoing. Lead poisoning from discarded fishing weights, entanglement in fishing line that cuts through flesh to bone, habitat loss as waterways are developed, water pollution that contaminates food sources, dog attacks from pets whose owners don't control them near wildlife. These threats require systematic monitoring to detect and address. The swan-upping ceremony provides that monitoring. It just does so within a framework of tradition that ensures continued public attention and institutional support. Try getting funding for annual Thames Swan Census from a government budget committee. Now try explaining that it's a tradition dating back centuries, attended by the public, covered by media, maintained by the royal household. One of those pitches works, the other doesn't. Is that really so ridiculous? And then there are the ravens. Everyone knows the legend. If the ravens ever leave the Tower of London, the kingdom will fall. What fewer people know is how seriously that legend has been taken, and for how long. Charles II is credited with formalizing the raven's protection after the restoration of 1660. The story goes that his astronomers warned him that the birds must not be disturbed. Whether he believed the prophecy literally or simply understood its symbolic utility, a king who had been restored to his throne after civil war and execution of his father might have been particularly attuned to symbols of stability. His decree established a tradition that has now persisted for more than 350 years. The ravens became living emblems of the kingdom's continuity. Their presence a daily reassurance, visible to every visitor, that the ancient fortress, and by extension the monarchy it represented, remained intact. Not a painting of stability, not a statue. Living, breathing, croaking birds that had to be fed and cared for every single day. Caring for those ravens is the Raven Master's job. Christopher Scaife, who has held the position in recent decades, has written extensively about the practical realities of caring for highly intelligent corvids in a working historical site visited by millions of tourists annually. Ravens aren't pigeons. They're problem solvers with individual personalities, capable of holding grudges, recognizing faces, and getting bored in ways that lead to destructive behavior. Each raven has a name, a distinct personality, and an individual relationship with the Raven Master who feeds and trains them. They require specific diets: raw meat, blood-soaked biscuits, the occasional egg, veterinary attention from specialists who understand corvid physiology, behavioral enrichment to keep their minds occupied, and protection from hazards their medieval keepers never imagined. Tourists who want selfies, dogs on leads, discarded food that might make them ill. Scaife has described his role as a tremendous privilege, not ironic, not defensive, a genuine expression of what it means to hold a position freighted with 3.5 centuries of symbolic weight, while also doing the hands-on work of animal husbandry that most visitors never see. The ravens stay, the kingdom endures, and someone has to make that happen, 7 days a week, in all weather, with no holidays when the birds don't need feeding. The pattern holds with positions even older than the ravens. By 1360, and likely long before, royal records document the position of Master of the Horse. The medieval monarch depended entirely on horses for transportation, for military capability, for the projection of royal power across distances that no other technology could bridge. Roads were unreliable. Carriages were slow and uncomfortable. Rivers only went where rivers went. The individual responsible for the monarch's horses held a position of genuine operational significance, not ceremonial ornament, practical necessity. Without horses, the king couldn't govern, couldn't campaign, couldn't even travel to meet his own nobles. The master of the horse ensured that when the king required transport, transport was available. When military campaigns demanded cavalry, cavalry was ready. When royal processions needed to project magnificence, the horses and their trappings met that standard. The position ranked among the great officers of state because horses were, quite literally, the infrastructure upon which royal power moved. When Elizabeth I processed through London, the master of the horse rode immediately behind her, a position of proximity reflecting both the role's importance and the trust placed in its holder. The Earl of Leicester served as Elizabeth's master of the horse for much of her reign, a position that placed him at the center of court life and provided regular, legitimate access to the monarch that other courtiers could only envy. Today, the role has evolved, but hasn't disappeared. The Royal Mews still operates. The Windsor Greys and Cleveland Bays that draw royal carriages during state occasions still need to be trained for conditions no ordinary horse would tolerate. Massive crowds pressing against barriers, unpredictable noises from every direction, military bands playing at full volume, aircraft flyovers, fireworks, the sensory chaos of a 21st century London street packed with 300,000 spectators. This training takes years. It requires handlers who understand both equine psychology and the specific demands of ceremonial work. A horse that spooks during a coronation procession doesn't just embarrass its rider, it endangers everyone nearby. It disrupts a ceremony watched by billions. It potentially injures the monarch. The training is relentless and patient. The same handlers work with the same horses for years, building trust, introducing stimuli gradually, rehearsing routes until the animals know every turn. When the horses drawing the Diamond Jubilee State Coach processed down the mall during King Charles III's coronation on the 6th of May, 2023, their calm composure wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was the result of work by Royal Mews staff whose expertise made the apparently effortless spectacle possible. And speaking of expertise that exists nowhere else, consider the clocks. Buckingham Palace alone contains over 350 clocks. Windsor Castle has more. Across all the royal residences, the collection exceeds 1,000 timepieces, some dating back centuries, each with its own mechanism, its own quirks, its own maintenance requirements. Someone has to wind them. The Royal Horological Conservator maintains this collection, and the job is considerably more demanding than turning a few keys. These aren't modern battery-powered devices that require nothing more than an occasional battery swap. They're mechanical instruments with springs, gears, pendulums, and escapements that need regular attention from someone who understands 18th century clockmaking as well as contemporary conservation principles. Twice a year, when the clocks change for British summertime, the true scale of this job reveals itself. Adjusting 1,000 clocks, moving forward an hour in spring, back an hour in autumn, takes approximately 50 hours of continuous work. That's not a typo. 50 hours to walk through palaces, reaching each clock, making the adjustment, ensuring the mechanism hasn't been damaged by the change. Some historical clocks are delicate enough that moving the hands backwards can harm them. Those require special techniques. Without this position, what happens? A palace where half the clocks show the wrong time. A state drawing room where the mantelpiece clock contradicts the one in the corridor. Staff confused about schedules. Visitors getting incorrect information. And gradually, as clocks stop being wound, mechanisms seizing, springs failing, the entire collection degrading into silence. The Royal Horological Conservator isn't a whimsical appointment for someone who likes old things. It's a preservation role, protecting horological heritage worth millions. Timepieces that simply cannot be replaced, and whose mechanisms represent craftsmanship that no longer exists anywhere else. And then there's the Gold State Coach itself. Completed in 1762, it weighs approximately 4 tons and requires 8 horses to draw it. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Gilded sculptures, painted panels by Giovanni Cipriani, intricate carvings representing the power and reach of the British crown. It's a masterpiece of 18th century coach building. It's also, by all accounts, absolutely miserable to ride in. Queen Elizabeth II famously called it horrible. The suspension system, based on 18th century technology, creates a swaying motion that has induced seasickness in multiple monarchs. Queen Victoria hated it so much, she reportedly refused to use it whenever possible. The jolting and lurching over even relatively smooth modern roads makes the journey from Westminster Abbey to Buckingham Palace an endurance test, not a triumphant glide. Yet the coach has been used at every coronation since George IV. When King Charles III returned from Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May 2023, he did so in the Gold State Coach, just as his mother had in 1953, just as his grandfather had in 1937, just as every monarch back to 1821. Not because they enjoyed it, because continuity matters. Because using the same vehicle communicates something that words cannot. This institution persists. This ceremony connects us to our past. Maintaining that coach requires expertise that cannot be found elsewhere. The Royal Mews employs carriage restorers whose skills have been passed down through apprenticeship systems that preserve techniques no longer taught in any formal program. The knowledge required to maintain 18th century gilding, to repair historical paintwork using period-appropriate methods, to ensure that 260-year-old mechanisms continue to function safely under the weight of monarchs and regalia, this knowledge exists in the Royal Mews and virtually nowhere else. If those craftsmen retired tomorrow without passing on their skills, what would happen? The Gold State Coach would gradually deteriorate. Repairs would become impossible. Within a generation or two, a masterpiece of British craftsmanship, irreplaceable, unique, carrying the symbolic weight of 2.5 centuries of coronations, would be lost. The positions that support this work exist because the alternative would be exactly that loss. The same principle applies to state banquets, where the pursuit of perfection reaches levels that border on the obsessive, until you understand why. When a foreign head of state visits Britain for a state banquet, they're seated at a table set with such precision that staff use rulers to measure the distance between glasses. Literally, rulers placed on the tablecloth to ensure every wine glass sits exactly the same distance from every plate. Footmen serving the meal follow a traffic light system. Green means proceed with the next course. Amber means wait. Red means stop. Something has happened that requires the service to pause. This system allows dozens of servers to move in coordination without verbal communication that would disturb the guests. The meal progresses as if choreographed, because it has been choreographed, down to the second. Every element of the table setting has been tested beforehand. The spacing between chairs, the height of the candelabra relative to sightlines, so guests can see each other across the table. The positioning of flowers, so they don't block conversation. The temperature of the room, to account for the heat generated by 170 people eating together. Why this level of detail? Because a state banquet isn't a dinner party. It's diplomacy. The foreign leader seated at that table represents their nation. How they're treated communicates something about how Britain values that relationship. A meal that runs smoothly, where every need is anticipated, where the setting achieves genuine magnificence, that creates an atmosphere conducive to the conversations that happen afterward. The conversations where actual agreements get made. A badly organized banquet, by contrast, creates irritation, distraction, the sense that the host nation couldn't be bothered to get the details right. That impression lingers. It affects negotiations. It affects how the visiting leader describes Britain to their own government. The people who orchestrate these events, overseen by the Master of the Household's department, understand that perfection isn't vanity. It's an operational requirement for events where the stakes are genuinely high. Still sound ridiculous? In 1215, the position of Queen's barge master was established, recognizing that the monarch required skilled watermen who understood the Thames, its currents, its tides, its hazards. The river served as London's primary thoroughfare in an era when roads were unreliable at best and impassable at worst. River transport offered the most efficient means of moving people and goods through the capital. The bargemaster position formalized this requirement, creating a role that has persisted for more than 800 years. The families who served in this capacity developed expertise passed from parent to child, creating dynasties of Thames watermen whose skills represented institutional knowledge impossible to replicate through mere instruction. You can't learn the Thames from a book. You learn it from someone who learned it from someone who learned it from someone. 800 years of one family knowing how to do one job that someone needs to do. But the roles are only half the story. The people who fill them are the other half. And this is where it stops being about tradition for tradition's sake and starts being about something else entirely. Something that feels almost unfashionable to talk about in an age that treats devotion with suspicion. Family pride, generational service, the understanding that some things are worth dedicating not just a career, but a lineage to. Lady Maud Dugdale served as lady-in-waiting to Queen Mary, consort of George V. It was an unpaid position, a detail that reveals everything about its nature. Ladies-in-waiting served not for financial compensation, but for the honor of proximity to the sovereign. The families who provided daughters for this service regarded the appointment as recognition of their standing and trustworthiness. Lady Maud's daughter was Susan Hussey. Susan Hussey served Queen Elizabeth II as lady-in-waiting for more than 60 years. 60 years. From 1960 until the Queen's death in September 2022. From 1960, she was a constant presence, and she was there at the end. Think about what that span contains. The entirety of the 1960s, the social revolution, the changing world, the tumultuous 1970s, the wedding of Charles and Diana, the fire at Windsor Castle, the annus horribilis of 1992, when the Queen famously described a year of family disaster. The Jubilees, silver in 1977, golden in 2002, diamond in 2012, platinum in 2022. The constitutional crises, the family dramas, the state visits, the Christmas broadcasts that became national rituals. Through all of it, Susan Hussey was there, serving, accompanying, being present in the way that ladies-in-waiting have been present for centuries. Not seeking attention, but providing company, assistance, and the quiet continuity of a familiar face during decades of change. That's not employment. That's vocation, passed from mother to daughter. That's a family understanding that service to the crown represents something worth dedicating a life to. When former household staff speak about their service, they consistently use language that emphasizes honor rather than obligation. The phrase, tremendous privilege, appears again and again, in memoirs, in interviews, in documentary footage. Not as false modesty or performative gratitude, as genuine expression of how they experience their work. The royal household offers proximity to the center of national life in ways no other employment can match. The butler who helps prepare a state dinner for a visiting head of state participates in diplomacy. The footman who assists with a coronation procession becomes part of constitutional history. The dresser who ensures the monarch's appearance meets the demands of the occasion shapes how Britain presents itself to the world. All of these individuals can truthfully say they played a role in moments that will be remembered for centuries. What other career offers that? The 2023 coronation brought all of this together: ancient offices, modern operations, hereditary duties, institutional knowledge, and real people doing real work to make something extraordinary appear effortless. The Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, oversaw the proceedings as his family has overseen every coronation since the 17th century. A hereditary responsibility the Norfolk family prepares for across decades. Knowing that the coronation might come at any time, they have no control over when monarchs die, and that when the moment comes, execution must be flawless. Lord Parker of Minsmere served as Lord Chamberlain, overseeing the household arrangements that made the coronation possible. The Coronation Order of Service, published by the royal household, documented intricate choreography requiring coordination between hundreds of participants. Processions timed to the second, oaths delivered in precise sequence, religious elements conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury, presentations of regalia passed from hand to hand in unbroken tradition, the actual crowning with St. Edward's crown, the homage from assembled nobles, the departure in ancient state. Each element required preparation measured in months. Rehearsals, contingency planning, coordination with security services, broadcasters, foreign dignitaries, military units, clergy, and the countless staff who ensured that every physical element, from the chairs to the candles to the music, was exactly where it needed to be. The Royal Mews prepared both the Diamond Jubilee State Coach, in which the King and Queen processed to the Abbey, and the Gold State Coach for the return journey. The horses had been trained for years, to handle the specific conditions of a coronation procession. The carriages had been maintained by specialists whose expertise exists nowhere else in Britain. Every person who participated in that ceremony held a position that critics might call absurd, ceremonial, unnecessary, a waste. But watch the footage, watch the procession, watch the precision and the dignity and the continuity with ceremonies stretching back 1,000 years. Then ask yourself, what exactly are they wasting? These jobs exist because they solve real problems, they preserve real heritage, they maintain real institutional knowledge that would otherwise disappear. They provide real data about real swan populations. They keep real ravens at the tower. They train real horses to do things ordinary horses cannot. They restore real coaches that are literally irreplaceable. They wind real clocks that have kept time for centuries. They break in real shoes so a real monarch can stand for hours doing real diplomatic work without real blisters undermining the composure that diplomacy requires. None of that is unreasonable. The dismissive assumption that tradition equals waste, that's the real absurdity. It assumes that anything old must be pointless, that efficiency means stripping away everything except the purely functional, that the only value worth measuring is the value that shows up in a spreadsheet. But some things can't be measured that way. The continuity of an institution, the preservation of craftsmanship, the symbolic weight of ravens who have lived at the tower since a king decreed they must, the comfort of knowing that some things persist, even as everything else changes. So the next time someone mocks a royal household job as ridiculous, you've got an answer now. You know what the swan marker actually does. You know why the Raven Master's work requires genuine expertise. You know that breaking in the Queen's shoes was sensible logistics, not pampered absurdity. You know that the people who do these jobs describe them as a tremendous privilege, not demeaning servitude. You're allowed to respect these traditions. They've earned it. Here's my question for you, though. If you could hold any of these positions, which one would you actually want? The swan marker, out on the Thames each July in a traditional rowing skiff. The Raven Master, caring for birds that carry 350 years of symbolic weight and have personalities to match. The piper, playing beneath the monarch's window as dawn breaks over the palace. Working in the royal mews, preserving craftsmanship that exists nowhere else. Training horses for ceremonies watched by billions. Or maybe something quieter. A position where your work supports the whole enterprise without ever appearing in the photographs. The person who ensures the right chair is in the right place. The person who knows where every ceremonial sword is stored. The person who spends 50 hours twice a year making certain every clock in the palace shows the correct time. Drop your answer in the comments. I'm genuinely curious which of these jobs appeals to you and why. Subscribe for more stories like this.